The legendary British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had famously once quipped that he doesn't feel the need to apologize to the Red Indians of America or the Aborigines of Australia because, according to him, they were replaced by a stronger, superior, and worldly wise race, the white folks. Now, clearly, for all his war-winning attributes, Winston Churchill, at his very core, was also a racist. There's been documented evidence of how he believed that the white Protestants were top of the pyramid in the human race, followed by white Catholics, Indians, and at the bottom of the pyramid, the blacks. He believed that colonialism was Britain's obligation to the rest of the world for a cleansing and civilizing mission. So Churchill would turn in his grave because 70 years later, his country, Britain, could possibly elect the first ever Prime Minister who is a person of color. The race to choose Britain's next Prime Minister has revealed a surprising fact about the country's ruling Conservative Party: that it is willing to back a potential leader from a racial minority background. This has got to be an achievement of sorts, because in a party which has more than 97% of its members who are white, it's a far cry from the Conservative Party's old reputation as a white, privately educated boys' club which was out of touch with the multicultural nation that Britain had become. The leading candidate in the prime ministerial race is former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak, who is of South Asian heritage. Of the initial field of 8 candidates, half of them were racial minorities. One of the candidates who bowed out, Kemi Badenoch, was a black whose parents were from Nigeria. She even spent a considerable part of her childhood in Lagos. 2 others who were in the final field of 3, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and former Defense Secretary Penny Mordaunt, are both white women. Surprisingly, Britain's Conservative Party has led the way in terms of both racial and gender representation at the highest levels of UK government. Now, this is quite contrary to the public perception of the Tories. If Rishi Sunak is the one who's chosen to replace Boris Johnson, then he will become Britain's first Prime Minister ever from an ethnic minority in the modern era. Benjamin Disraeli, who served twice as Conservative Prime Minister in the late 19th century, he was Jewish, but still white. The Conservatives were also responsible for Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first ever woman Prime Minister, who was elected in 1979 and went on to become one of the longest-serving Prime Ministers of Britain. Theresa May, Britain's second woman Prime Minister, was also a Conservative leader. And if in this battle Liz Truss wins, then she will go on to become the 3rd ever woman Prime Minister of Britain. In recent years, the party has broken barriers for racial minorities in the highest offices of government. In fact, one of the senior lawmakers who was also part of the initial field of 8 running in this race, Zakka Jacob, became both the first racial minority Home Secretary and later on Finance Minister. This was in 2018 and in 2019 respectively. The party's next leader will be decided by what many say is a convoluted internal process. First, the field of candidates is whittled down by Conservative lawmakers in successive rounds of voting until the final 2 are announced. And those final 2 happen to be Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Then these 2 candidates will be voted by the card-carrying members of the Conservative Party. There are about 180,000 of them. Now, these folks are older, they are wealthier, and whiter than the rest of Britain. About 97% of the Conservative Party is white, many of them male. So will Rishi Sunak be able to find his lead in a sea of white men and women? Are Brits comfortable with a racial minority Prime Minister? The answer among pollsters, politicos, academics is an emphatic yes. Now, a key voting bloc for the Conservative Party are those who voted Conservative in the last election, which Boris Johnson won by a landslide, but those same folks who voted for Labour in previous elections. This is a significant voter base of the Conservative Party, and this base is now answering overwhelmingly yes in focus groups that they would be comfortable with a prime minister who is not white. It shows that attitudes towards people from migrant communities in this new Britain have changed a lot. Now, that is not to say that there is no longer any racist element in Britain or that Britain has stopped becoming a racist country, but things have indeed changed and changed a great deal. The same is likely true for card-carrying members of the Conservative Party, who are the ones who will actually decide the next Prime Minister. But the fact that there are so many senior members of the ruling party from ethnically minority backgrounds is not an accident. This was a plan that was put into motion a decade and a half ago. The Conservative Party back then had just 2 lawmakers out of 200 who were from an ethnic minority background. The party was out of power at that time, and it knew that it had to revamp its image to succeed long-term in modern-day Britain. So in 2006, the then newly elected party leader David Cameron introduced a conscious push to ensure that the party more accurately reflected the nation. Cameron, who became the Prime Minister 4 years later, he brought in shortlists where the priority was for racial minority candidates and women candidates, particularly in those seats where the party knew it was likely to win by big margins. That policy, started by David Cameron, it worked. It resulted in a huge influx of new lawmakers, some of whom have now risen to the highest ranks of the party. They were promoted by successive leaders who were keen to scrap practices that prioritize white candidates over more talented minority candidates. But it would be a mistake to suggest that because the Conservative Party has broken so many barriers at the highest levels of government in terms of representation, it is more diverse than the opposition Labour Party. Although the Labour Party has never elected a woman or someone from an ethnic minority background to be its leader, the party does have more minority lawmakers. Labour has 41 MPs who are from an ethnically minority background, and the Conservatives have only 22, even though Labour has far fewer seats in Parliament. The Labour Party also receives a lion's share of votes from Britain's minority communities at roughly 64%. So 2 out of 3 minorities vote for the Labour Party. This is according to the pollster Ipsos. So back to the question of who will be Britain's new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's campaign for this season has been ready for Rishi. The real question is his country, Britain, ready for a new ethnic minority Prime Minister?